Have you ever thought about different versions of a particular movie? It always fascinated me having multiple versions of a film and seeing what was different about it upon rewatch. Whether it just added a few scenes and made it more coherent, or in some cases was just a completely new experience. I own a ton of cuts for superhero movies, and I kind of wanted to dedicate a playlist to these and shine some light on the good and the bad. Plus, it'll be fun going over the changes made and how it impacts the movie. I thought the best way to start this would be with one of the most iconic superhero movies of all time. That being Spider-Man 2. You already know how I feel about this film. I love its story, I love its characters, the action is great, the effects have held up really nicely, I just love this movie to pieces. Do I have my issues with it? Of course I do. Are they major? Well, mostly no, but there are some red flags thrown in for good measure. Even with my gripes, I would still go out of my way and say that this is one of the best comic book films ever released and is still the best Spider-Man movie to date. I know the Spider-Verse people are going to come after me for just saying that, but to me this encapsulates everything I love about Peter Parker and his alter ego, and is a film I can always come back to at any point and still enjoy it like I was a toddler. With that said, let's get into the changes on display in a series simply called Before we dive in, let's get into some backstory for this. So picture this, it's April 2007, Spider-Man 3 is releasing that next month, and the hype train had already left the station by this point. People were going crazy waiting for this movie to come out, and then out of nowhere, an extended cut for the previous movie was coming out for DVD. There was a version of this cut that was showcased on FX 3 months prior, and I actually remember staying up and watching this. Not only because, it's a great movie and all, but I needed that Spider-Man 3 preview, man. I needed it in my life. This version of the movie would release on April 17th, with the main talking points being a preview for the next movie, but also 8 minutes of previously unseen footage. Since this has come out, it would be included in Blu-ray sets like the Legacy Collection and Origins Collection, which I own, but nobody ever talks about this version of the movie. But I guess I'm about to involve myself in the conversation and give this cut its time of day. Now with that out of the way, let's get into what was actually changed and tell you if it's any good or not. Right off the bat is a change that affects the movie as a whole, which is the color palette is different compared to the theatrical release. It has a more pinkish hue now, which I guess it makes the image warmer, but I think I like the original better. The lights and shadows add a better contrast for the scenes, and I think the 2.1 version disregards all of that and makes some moments look worse. It isn't the most notable thing for someone who isn't paying attention to stuff like that, but it's worth bringing up anyway. So after the awesome Alex Ross opening sequence, the first big alteration comes when Peter arrives at Joe's Pizza, and we get some more dialogue of Mr. Aziz yelling at other employees and even Peter chiming back. I like how New York this feels, but this scene was better in the original since it got the point across and kicked off the plot immediately. All the alternate takes didn't need to be there, and we lost the best go in cinema. Go! And now... Go! Next we cut to an extended scene of Peter messing around with all the brooms and mops from the janitor's closet. I like the added touches of Peter pulling the web off the pizza box and him taking the elevator when he leaves. It's a fun change, and I like how much more awkward it makes the scene. Back at the Parker house for his birthday, we get more of Harry and Pete talking, which also includes Peter consoling his best friend, and we get MJ and Aunt May bringing the cake out to sing happy birthday, which concludes with a transition to the next scene. I like these added moments, but they don't feel necessary at all. The scene of them talking about Norman is touching for sure, but I like the original because it just conveyed that moment much better, and I'm glad this was left on the cutting room floor. In the backyard, we get some dialogue between MJ and Peter talking about their careers and personal lives. Again, this is very minor and not really noteworthy, but I do like the quip Pete throws out.
I'm seeing somebody now.
Oh. Therapy.
Upon the audience meeting the most powerful character in this universe, we get an added change when Peter sits on his bed when he turns his police scanner on and listens to all the reports coming in as the scene fades out. To be honest, I don't mind either version of this moment. They both do a good job at showing you what the current situation is for our hero. The extended version is good because it really sinks in how terrible it would be to lead a double life and how much Spider-Man consumes Peter in the long run. It's a tiny change that leaves a lot of impact. The next two scenes have some of the weirdest changes so far. When Peter meets Otto, we have some slightly different editing as Otto is talking about intelligence, and after Peter meets Rosie, we get an alternate take that is so similar to the original you're wondering why they went with this.
Is that it?
Yes. My design for initiating and sustaining fusion.
The next clip is mostly the same aside from some altered editing and the married couple talking more about T.S. Eliot. It's cute, but besides the quote and the early introduction of Rosie, these changes are just baffling and didn't need to be here at all. Now we have a different ending to the car chase, where after webbing up the two-door light post, Peter takes the car for himself and unmasks for everyone to see his face clearly. I guess they wanted to explain why Peter has the car outside the theater, but it's just dumb and out of character for the webhead. Next we have a bit more added to the Bruce Campbell Usher clip, and I don't need to explain why this scene is already great and now made better. It's Bruce fucking Campbell.
Hail to the king, baby.
The elevator scene is very different here. It goes on much longer and has Spidey being pitched ideas for marketing like cologne and hammocks. I like both versions, but for pacing purposes, I think I like the theatrical take more. Just that awkwardness between them is what sells it for me.
Looks uncomfortable.
It gets kind of itchy. It rides up in the crotch a little bit, too.
We get a small moment that I love where in the middle of Dr. Connor's class, we have Pete not paying attention and doodling in his notebook. This is so Peter Parker to me, and I would have liked this in the actual movie. It would have been a nice contrast to a moment we get later in the Raindrops montage. Also, one little tidbit, this bleeds over into the payphone scene and the music carries over as well. It's minor, but, you know, you get it. Next is the hospital massacre with only the slightest of changes. First are two close-ups of the doctor being electrocuted, which might have been removed for censorship reasons. After that we get more of the chainsaw bit and another close-up of a screaming doctor. Like I said, these are extremely minor and don't really impact me differently in any way. Now we come to the first fight between Spider-Man and Doc Ock, and there is some things to mention. First is the removal of the headbutt. It's minor, but really strange. I don't know if this was a mistake from the people who put this version together, but it's weird watching the two scenes back to back. Next is Spidey and Ock crashing in an office, which has some really nice practical effects work. And lastly is an extended shot of them fighting on the side of the building before the wall crawler is thrown across the street. Overall, I like the added scenes. The action is great enough already, and I think it doesn't hurt to see more of it. Besides the headbutt, the CG for this moment is a bit off, but nothing that takes me completely out of the movie. Another new scene is showcased between MJ and her friend shopping and talking about the marriage. Personally, this scene doesn't need to be here because it just goes over points we've already got a good idea of beforehand. It adds nothing to the overall movie, and I'm glad that this didn't make it into the final film. It cuts over to the scene with Peter and the school doctor. Besides an alternate take and mentioning that Connors might be flunking Peter, we get some more insight from the doctor about identity and the strong focus that actually pays off in another scene later on.
Strong focus on what I want.
I think they should have kept this in the original cut. The setup for later is great, and the added dialogue just works for the overall message of the movie. The theatrical version still goes along smoothly without it, but I think leaving it in would have made much more of an impact. We get some slight edits and added lines to the Uncle Ben moment, but it's just another scene that doesn't affect me, so you could take either version. Now we have the one change to the raindrop sequence. I guess it's Raimi, but I don't understand what they're doing here, so I guess we'll just move on. Next is the scene that everyone talks about, with Jameson jumping around the office wearing the Spidey suit as the Bugle staff watches him from the window blinds. This was criminal to take out, so I'm glad the world had the chance to experience this masterful moment. I just find it hilarious for someone who is so critical of the web slinger to be doing this. Great moment overall. Wish we could have had it in the theatrical version. We have arrived at the final changes, which come from the train fight. First is an extension of the two battling it out on the side of the train as they pass to the next stop. Second is after Spidey leaps off the building, we get a shot of him being thrown around like a rag doll, smashing through signs and ultimately getting hit by another train. Like I said with the last fight scene, it's just more of the same great action, and since this is one of the best fight scenes in any comic book movie, I don't mind the added bits being thrown in here. Now, having gone over every single change, what are my thoughts on this version of the film as a whole? Spider-Man 2.1 is an entertaining way of watching the 2004 original, but to be perfectly honest, this cut didn't really need a reason to exist. That mostly boils down to a lot of the added material feeling very minor or just flat out unnecessary. So many scenes just feel different for all the wrong reasons, and it brings the movie down slightly from its overall quality. Even the scenes I did like and felt should have been in there was more for comedic quality and doesn't really affect the narrative. There are some glimmers of meaningful moments, but those are very few and far between. If you're a Spider-Man 2 mega fan, I'm sure you've already seen this dozens of times. But for the casual audience, that depends on how interested you are to begin with. Regardless of my critique, this is still mostly Spider-Man 2 how I remember it, so you're going to enjoy it regardless. It's also been released so many times now, so you shouldn't have a hard time tracking it down. I guess my final words would be, right on? That's going to be it for the video, folks. I wanted to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Spider-Man 2, and I thought this would be a great way to kind of kick off this playlist. So yeah, just like with Revisiteds and, the recently shown off reported stuff, I'm always fascinated with different versions of particular comic book media, so I figured it would be nice to kind of showcase stuff like this in its own playlist and, be released later on and whatnot. So I won't be making too many of these videos often because, well, I need to review more movies, but I can tell you what I'm going to be doing for the next time we come back. I'm going to take a look at the editor's cut of Spider-Man 3. Someday. I'm not sure when, but someday. But in the meantime, there's plenty of other videos to make, so with that being said, I hope you all have a great night. Thank you all so much for watching, and of course, take care of yourselves.